What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I have the honor and privilege to be doing my first interview on my channel, and I'm joined by none other than Dr. Nirav Pandya. You may have heard him on 95.7 The Game. You may have seen him on NBC Sports, during Warriors post-game shows. But if you are a Bay Area sports fan, you've probably heard of him or seen him somewhere, and you know how smart he is. But today I have the honor and privilege to have him on my channel, and you get to see him on my channel. And he was so generous enough and kind to be giving me some of his valuable time today. But how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I mean, I've actually seen some of your stuff on social media as well too. So you're doing a phenomenal job, and I think you have a great career ahead of you. And maybe I'll see you on ESPN in a couple of years. So I think that would be great.
That's the goal. That's the goal. But whatever this takes me, I'm just doing this for fun right now. But
Yeah.
if it does end up turning into a career, I wouldn't mind. I definitely enjoy talking about sports. But let's jump right into it. I mean, obviously, I've seen I've heard you on 95.7 The Game before. I've seen you on Warriors post game shows and different things like that. But I want to get to know you. I've heard you obviously talk about injuries and different things like that, but I want to get to know you. And the first question that I have for you is, how did you become, a 49ers fan? And then the follow up would be, how did you become a Warriors fan?
Yeah, so I've been a sports fan my whole life. So I'm originally from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, and I didn't really end up in the Bay until I got my job working at UCSF. But huge sports fan. So growing up in Chicago, obviously the Bears were huge, the Bulls were huge. So I've always been a huge football and basketball fan. And coming out to the Bay, I always joke I came out right when Steph Curry, right around the time he got drafted. And obviously the 49ers, Bears, obviously the 49ers got the better of the Bears when I was growing up, except for when they won the Super Bowl, Bears in '85. But always been a big 49ers fan as well too. I think they definitely were a team that I wished my Bears played like, with a great offense, very explosive. Our Bears team was very run heavy, defense oriented. Now we're kind of seeing a little bit of both with the 49ers. So came out to the Bay. Obviously, I'm a huge sports fan, so really got kind of ingrained, and really latched on to the 49ers now that I was in the area. And same thing with the Warriors. My Bulls not doing so hot recently, and same thing with my Bears. So latched onto the Warriors, and just being part of the community and taking care of people who are fans of these sports teams. I really just latched on, and it's been 11 years out here in the Bay, and I love the teams. It's great, and I feel just like when I was in Chicago growing up. I feel part of the fan base, and I'm a fan number one, and physician, injury analyst number two. It's all about being a fan at the beginning.
Well, I want to ask you, since you said you lived in Chicago, you grew up in Chicago early on. How was it watching MJ, prime MJ in those early years, watching those Bulls magical, three peats, obviously the six championships that Michael Jordan, that Bulls team won. But how was it as a young kid? Because obviously I wasn't alive back then. But how was it watching those early Michael Jordan Bull years, especially as a young kid growing up in Chicago? I mean, that must have been phenomenal.
It was amazing, and I think a lot of my son's 12 years old now, so he's kind of at the same age when I was watching Curry, when I was watching Jordan. It's very similar to how people kind of look at Curry. I mean, you showed up every night waiting for him to do something special, and I think the most amazing thing about Jordan was that at the end of the game, whenever it was close, you knew that he was going to get the ball and he was going to finish. And just we expected greatness, and the fact that he was able to do it after playing baseball for 2 years, coming back. I mean, he really owned that city, and it was great. And I think a lot of the things that we see with people like Curry, people like Kobe, people like LeBron, Jordan was like all of them put together and basically was running the NBA. And even before social media was huge, he was really the first, I mean, in my eyes, national worldwide basketball fan. I mean, a player for a lot of fans. So it was great. I mean, it was phenomenal. And I'm lucky. I say I grew up with Jordan, and as an adult, I've gotten Curry, so I can't complain at all.
Yep. Follow up question to, obviously you are a doctor, and I want to ask you, what made you want to become a doctor? I mean, obviously there's a lot of different career choices out there, and obviously you are a sports fan, but what made you want to become a doctor? Was that something early on that, either your parents had an influence on that, or were you just, I want to become a doctor when I grew up, and you decided to become a doctor?
No, that's a great question. So my dad, when he was alive, he was a family physician in Chicago. So medicine was definitely a part of my life growing up, but they never forced me to go into that. They said, look, whatever you want to do, just as long as you enjoy it and you're passionate about it, go into it. And I think I had a lot of influence with medicine early on in my life. I was a huge sports fan, so I knew I wanted to take care of athletes, and be involved in sport. So I kind of thought about coaching. I thought about maybe exercise physiology, and I was like, look, I like using my hands. I want to be a surgeon. I want to take care of athletes. So that's how I kind of came into medicine and orthopedic surgery. And I kind of knew at a very early age, I think 16, 17, or 18, I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do and kind of set up my experiences growing up to want to do that. And I come to work every day and I love it. I talk sports, I get people back on the field, get them healthy and use my hands. So medicine was something that I felt that I could help people, and also enjoy my life as well too. And I think it's a combination of both. You have to find something where I feel you can make a difference, but also enjoy coming to work every day. And medicine was that for me. So definitely, as traditional South Asian parents, they didn't force me into medicine, lawyer, becoming a lawyer and engineer. But I think seeing my dad take care of patients and kind of influenced me, and being a sports fan, I think the combination of those two led me to be an orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah, well, it's kind of similar for me in a way because a lot of my family are doctors. A lot of my family, my dad does X-rays and CAT scans, and he's a radiology tech, and I have cousins and all sorts of stuff that are doctors, and so a lot of my family is actually in the medical field.
Yeah,
So it's one of those things where I know what that field is like a little bit more than some other people my age, but it's never something that's interested me yet. But I still got a couple of years to go, so we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I might change my mind, but I definitely have people in that same field, so I know what it feels. I know
yeah.
how it feels. Another question about sports is that who's your favorite 49ers and Warriors player of all time? Or if you don't want to give me a Warriors player, who's your favorite player? Obviously Michael Jordan's an obvious one, but if you had
Yeah.
to pick your 49er favorite player, 49ers player of all time, and favorite Warriors player of all time, who would you say that would be?
So I say favorite 49ers. I go Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice, just phenomenal work ethic, what he did in the era that he did, being an impactful receiver who's able to do that, going down the middle, speed routes, how many touchdowns he scored, just amazing with different quarterbacks. So I'd say I have to go Jerry Rice, number one. Favorite Warriors player, it's Curry. I mean,
Steph
it has to
Curry.
everyone, it's of course Curry. But, 49ers, I'd say Rice, number one. And actually, Ronnie Lott, number two. I think Lott played defense in a way that we just don't see anymore, and obviously that's for player safety. But I think a lot of people forget how athletic and phenomenal he was at his position, and how he could cover, he could tackle, he could do the run game. So I'd go Jerry Rice number one, Ronnie Lott number two.
Yep, and you talked about Curry. Now, obviously, I didn't get to see Michael Jordan, but Stephen Curry. I mean, I've got to see Stephen Curry, and some of the stuff that Stephen Curry does is just phenomenal, right? And you see even kids my age, and I'm in high school, is that like you'll see kids coming up the court wanting to shoot 3 pointers like Curry, and I'm on the basketball team in high school at this current school that I play at, and my coach is like, "That's not your range," and he'll tell the whole team, he's like, "That's not your range. You're not Curry. Stop trying to shoot 3 pointers." Right? And it doesn't usually when you pull up the court, you're trying to shoot a 3 pointer, it doesn't go the way that you think it'll go, and you either like airball it or you'll just miss really badly. But you're trying to do the Curry, you're trying to pull up the court and look good, make the flashy shot. But usually it doesn't end up that way. But obviously yesterday was the 49ers game. The Niners got a huge W. Brock Purdy looked really good, beat the GOAT, first ever rookie quarterback to go in his first ever
Right.
NFL start and to beat Tom Brady. But something happened unfortunate in the game was there was a handoff. Deebo Samuel got it and he got hurt and the cart came out, and instantly when the cart comes out you think of the worst. You think of, okay, this is season ending. Either he tore his ACL, something happened. You feel like it's season ending, especially when the cart comes out. We saw that earlier in the season with Trey Lance when the cart came out for
Mm-hmm.
him. Usually when the cart comes out, it is season ending or he's out for multiple months. But the Deebo Samuel injury wasn't that bad actually. It turned out to be not as bad as a lot of Niners fans thought it would be. It turned out to be a sprained knee, I think it was, and a sprained ankle. And the Niners said that he could return sometime during the regular season. So I want to ask you, how long does it usually take to, recover from that type of injury, and how many weeks or how long does it usually take for an athlete to recover from those types of injuries?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I thought the same thing too when the cart came out, and I was thinking, oh, initially this was a knee injury, and then I was like, oh, this could be like a bad high ankle sprain. But the MRI reports came back, MCL sprain and ankle sprain. And so typically, if you take each of those kind of injuries individually, typically for a low ankle sprain, which it sounds like it is, usually most NFL players, unless there's like a lot of injury to like everything else around the ankle, typically you're looking at 1 to 2 weeks in terms of those injuries. So I think the ankle sprain is probably less likely what's keeping him out, an extended period of time. Usually with an MCL, it can be 2 to 4 weeks, kind of your most garden variety MCL injuries. Now, obviously, Elijah Mitchell's was a little bit more serious. So it's, more along the lines of that 6 to 8 weeks. But just looking at kind of the injury, I think he was lucky in the sense that instead of all the force kind of going up his high ankle region, like a little bit went to the ankle, a little bit went to the knee, and kind of everything dissipated out. And you're looking at him potentially, I think they said maybe even week 17 versus the Raiders coming back. So usually it's a couple weeks for these kind of middle of the road MCL and ankle sprains, and maybe a little bit of a blessing in disguise for him. That not too serious an injury. He takes a couple weeks off, doesn't have to get the pounding on his body because, as we all know, Deebo soft tissue injuries, wear and tear kind of adds up to him at the end of the season. And now he's got a period of time where he can potentially not have to get all that wear and tear. So we may actually see a more refreshed Deebo when he comes back, hopefully at the end of the regular season.
Yep, and when you look at athletes, I mean, athletes obviously have more resources than a lot of regular people, so obviously that definitely helps in the recovery process. And for me personally, right, Deebo Samuel, he's been great for the Niners. Obviously having a little bit of a down year, but I mean, for me, I just want Deebo back for the playoffs healthy, right? If you can't make it back in the regular season, don't rush it, you know. But playoff Deebo, we need Deebo in the playoffs. So if he can come back, you know, somewhat 80% healthy, 90% healthy, and he takes that extra time off and gets that rest and doesn't play for the remainder of the regular season, if we can get Deebo somewhat healthy for the playoffs, I mean that would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think he's one of those players that can like win you a playoff game just on having one exciting performance. So, I think it's more about keeping him healthy for to do that kind of thing in the playoff, come, divisional round or a conference final. So absolutely. I think there's no rush for the regular season. I think everyone was thinking, oh, maybe this is, season ending or in the playoffs. So I think everything is good. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's no reason to rush him back. And if they, the 49ers clinch, they're going to clinch tomorrow with a playoff berth and then, secure a good seed. There's no reason to bring them back to like win a
Yep.
game or two at the end of the season. Yeah.
Yep. And you said, like, I mean, Debo can win you a playoff game, and you saw that last year. I mean, last year at times
Mhm.
Debo was pretty much the whole offense for the Niners, and the offense revolved around Debo and how well Debo would do that specific day. That's how great the offense would do. That's how many touchdowns, that's how many yards you would put up. And early on in the season last year, like we would struggle offensively. And then Shanahan put Debo in the backfield. Debo got going. Debo, if the offense wasn't, starting off slow, Debo would turn things around. So Debo obviously is having a little bit of a down year this year, and we know he tends to take a lot of hits on his body. All football players do, and usually even last year he got hurt. He had that hamstring. Even this year, some of the hamstring issues. But at least this gives Debo time to rest and heal, and we get him back for the playoffs. Hopefully, 80%, 90% healthy or fully healthy back for the playoffs.
Absolutely. No, totally agree. Yeah.
Well, obviously, we talked about the card in Deebo Samuel, but another person that the card came out for early on in the season was Trey Lance, and I was actually at that game. And funny story is that last year I went to the Seattle game also, and last year I'm a huge Trey Lance fan. I got the jersey on, and then Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt with the high ankle sprain, and Trey Lance comes into the game, and then I'm like, like before the game started, I'm just like, please don't let the same thing happen. Like, what a coincidence it would be if I go to the game looking forward to seeing Trey Lance's first start at Levi's and he gets hurt and Jimmy Garoppolo comes in. And what happens? Trey Lance gets hurt. The card comes out and you're like, oh my goodness. And I actually recorded the clip. So I recorded the clip, put my phone away, and and I look back up and I see a player down and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
My uncle looks at me and instantly, just from the look that I saw in his eyes, I'm just like, okay, I know what happened. And then the card comes out and I'm like, oh no, he's out for the whole year. This is a serious injury. And you gotta feel bad for Trey Lance. But it is December. It's been a couple of months since then. Niners transition to Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt. They transition to Brock Purdy. And so far, the transitions haven't been bad for both quarterbacks. It's been pretty smooth. The Niners have won the last 6 straight, so it's been a pretty smooth transition for the most part. But Trey Lance obviously broke his ankle. They said the recovery time would take 2 to 3 months. Now Shanahan is still ruling out, Trey Lance. But I want to ask you, how long does it usually take to recover from this type of injury? Now, the injury that Trey Lance sustained, which is a broken ankle, how long does it usually take? And can we potentially see Trey Lance come back, in the playoffs? Let's say divisional round. If Brock Purdy wins the wild card game, could we potentially see Trey Lance return?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think putting aside what the team and Shanahan have said, let's just put aside all that stuff. If you look at NFL players who kind of have the ankle injury that Trey Lance had, you have a fibula fracture and then an injury, some degree of ligament injury. On average, it's about 140 days for players to return. So that's on average. Now, you see the videos of Trey Lance running around, kind of doing some jogging, things like that. He looks great. So from a injury perspective, it would be absolutely possible for someone like Trey Lance to return in the playoffs. Like it's in a totally reasonable time frame. Now, if someone told me Trey Lance injured it a week ago, he couldn't come back. I mean, that's no way possible. But you could absolutely see a scenario where the bone heals, ligament heals, and he's back ready. I think the thing that's a little bit harder to determine is how confident is he going to be? That's one thing it's hard to say. Number two, how mobile can he be? So even though things are healed, how effective can he be as a quarterback? But I think theoretically, let's say he's moving well, he's confident. They're basically they need him to play. He could absolutely. Then it's really just the balance of can he be effective, and are they willing to take the risk of him potentially getting injured? Because one of the things you worry about is he's been off of his ankle a little bit. He has been running. He has been training. The last thing you want is does he hurt his knee? Does he hurt his hamstring? Does he hurt something else? So is there a possibility? Absolutely. Do I think they're willing to take that risk? It's hard. If Purdy gets hurt and you're thinking about Garoppolo's not technically ready yet, and Purdy's hurt. Are you going to go Josh Johnson, or are you going to take Trey Lance in a fine, again to make the Super Bowl? So until they rule him out and put him on the IR, I think it's still a possibility. It's totally within a reasonable medical time frame, but it's a lot of those intangibles that it's hard to predict. But I'd keep it open. I think it's a possibility. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, with Trey Lance, obviously you said the confidence, and that's the thing. You look at Jimmy Garoppolo and he tore his ACL, right? Jimmy Garoppolo coming back. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, you could sense that he was a little bit less confident coming back the year after. And obviously, a torn ACL is a way bigger injury than obviously breaking your ankle. But obviously, coming into if the Niners do decide to bring him back and he's able to play, I mean, a playoff game, obviously your first game back, if the Niners do decide to happen, if that situation actually comes to fruition, I mean, playoff game, divisional round, if you lose, you're out. I mean, how can a young quarterback handle that, especially coming off an injury? Will he be as willing to, run or extend plays or, scramble for that extra 5 yards to, pick up a first down? Those are obviously things that, we will see if that ever happens, which I doubt that
Yep.
Shanahan will bring back Trey Lance. I mean, just from what we've heard from Shanahan, I doubt it will happen. But obviously, not even just looking at this playoffs, but going into next year, I mean, if Brock Purdy does win the Super Bowl or takes us to the NFC Championship game, I mean, there's obviously competition there for a little bit for Trey Lance, and what's going to be your mental state going into training camp, going into next year. So that's definitely going to be something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting. I think it's kind of a little bit of a no-win situation for Lance. I mean, people see him out there on the field, kind of running, doing drills, and suddenly Purdy's not performing well, and people are going to be like, "Well, why aren't you playing?" Or if he plays and then he doesn't do well, it's like so many things can kind of impact his confidence as well too. So hopefully, and then the other scenario could be suddenly it's the time frame where Jimmy's maybe could come back, Purdy's doing well, and Trey Lance could potentially come back. Then what does Shanahan do? So it's a very interesting scenario that I think no one really thought about coming into the season. Everyone thought it's Trey Lance's team. Jimmy would be somewhere else, and it would be Sudfeld and Purdy backing everybody up. But it's obviously things have changed pretty dramatically. Yeah.
Yep. I remember the day when Jimmy Garoppolo got re-signed on the 49ers. That day I did not expect it. I was like, I remember friends, asking me, they're like, is Jimmy Garoppolo coming back? And I'm like, nah, he's gone. Like, there's only 2 more days. He's gone. Like, he's not, there's no way the Niners decide to bring him back. And then lo and behold, I checked Twitter one day and I'm like, whoa, they brought him back. Like, okay. The Niners decided to bring him back, which at the end of the day, it looked like it paid off, right? Obviously, with the Trey Lance injury,
Yeah.
nobody expected that, and it was an insurance policy to bring back Jimmy, and it worked out for the Niners in their favor. And we'll see what happens with the whole Jimmy Garoppolo, whole Jimmy Garoppolo scenario next offseason. That's going to be even crazier, obviously, with the injury. That's definitely going to be a crazy situation to monitor. But I want to talk to you. Obviously, I mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo and his torn ACL, but ever since I started watching football, which was, let's say, 2015, Jim Tomsula was my first year 49ers football, which wasn't a fun year,
No. Yeah.
and nor was Chip Kelly. That was even worse. But ever since I started watching football, I've heard about torn ACLs more, right? And there's certain injuries that from just watching football and watching sports in general, especially in football, two injuries that I know are really common is torn ACL, obviously breaking a bone, and then obviously torn Achilles. Those are two injuries that a lot of athletes, especially in football, torn ACL and torn Achilles. And yesterday, Kyler Murray tore his ACL, and it was a non-contact. He just ran to try to pick up a first down, and he got hurt and tore his ACL. He's out for the season. Same thing with Dante Johnson. You look at Jimmy Garoppolo, a couple of years ago with the Niners. But is a torn ACL, is it just an injury that obviously regular people have that injury, but does playing sports or being an athlete have an impact on someone tearing their ACL? Because ever since I've started watching sports, I feel like a very common injury is for a player or an athlete to tear their ACL.
Yeah, you definitely see it more often in athletes. Whether it be professional athletes kind of stressing their bodies or regular people trying to be athletes and not having been in shape to do it. So it's very common. I think that the key thing is I think like 15, 20 years ago, this was like a career ending injury or career altering injury where someone would, tear their ACL, you wouldn't see them back, the performance would be, pretty negative. But now it's almost an expectation of like when this player is going to be back, how are they going to perform? And I think a lot of it has to do with the surgeries we do now for this are so much more less invasive. You're able to rehab a lot more and get back on the field. So now it's like, okay, are they going to be back for training camp? Are there going to be issues? And so I think it definitely is related to sports. The more you stress your body, particularly with football, you're cutting, you're pivoting, people are tackling you, you're playing on turf. All those things kind of increase that risk. So, and I think also the other thing is that you're getting bigger and bigger players trying to play more athletically. So, back in the 80s, pretty much linemen went straight up and down the field. There was no side to side. Now you get guys like, I know Kinlaw's injured, but you get these like 320-pound people who are doing these crazy things. And obviously it puts more stress on your knees. So I think part of it's sports, part of it's the way these bigger and bigger athletes are trying to move. But as we get better and better with fixing them, people are coming back and stressing their bodies again. So absolutely, I think it's something we see very commonly, but we've gotten really good at fixing it and people can get back to play if they rehab right and take the time.
Yep, and you saw it with obviously Nick Bosa, who's a bigger athlete a couple of
Yeah.
years ago. You've seen it with Chase Young down in Washington. I mean, you see a lot of bigger athletes now tear their ACL, and it's obviously unfortunate. Luckily for the Niners, I mean, Bosa has come back even stronger. Coming off that torn ACL, 2 consistent years of playing majority of his games, having still been really, really super productive. But it's definitely something that I learned something from what you just said, obviously, with the athletes. And I've definitely seen it from watching football and watching, sports. It's not as common in basketball, but
Right.
it's definitely in football. I mean, in football, you hear about it at least 5 times every season. At least 5 times every season, someone tears their ACL, whether it might be on the Niners or some other team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always on every Monday morning or Sunday evening. Rappaport or Schefter is tweeting out so and so tore their ACL and is out for the season. So,
Yeah.
absolutely very common. I think something. I mean, there might have been 50 or 60 ACL tears. I think last year. So obviously, common basketball. You have like five or six of them a year. And I think where people forget, I think they concentrate a lot on the star players. That they come back, but there are still players that kind of disappear. I mean, Jason Verrett, for an example, keeps coming back, has issues. You'll see kind of players who are, second, third string who kind of fall off, maybe go on the practice squad somewhere. So still, even though people get back, I think the better athlete you are when you tear it, the more likely you're going to get back. If you are kind of like a borderline NFL player and you tear your ACL, it can be hard to make it back. So still a serious injury, but the expectations are different now.
Yep, and from what I've seen, right, there's certain players like you touched on. There's certain players that tear their ACL and that can come back even stronger and that can come back even better coming off the torn ACL. And you kind of mentioned it with Jason Verrett. I mean, not only with Jason Verrett, but some other athletes. I mean, they tear their ACL or they have a major injury and they're just not the same, or it takes them a year or two. Like for example, Richard Sherman. I mean, Richard Sherman
Right.
tore his Achilles. The year coming back right after that was a little bit slow. And then finally, the year after that, he kind of picked things up. And even though he still got burnt and beat a couple of times, he's an older cornerback,
Yeah.
but it definitely took him some time, and it took him a year, an extra year, to get back fully from the torn ACL. So it definitely takes different athletes. It obviously takes them different times to come back even stronger. Comes back. So definitely each athlete's on a different time frame.
Yeah.
Last question. Obviously, this whole show has been based around injuries, and obviously, we got to know you a little bit early on at the beginning of the show. But I mean, when you look at this Niners team, obviously, this Niners team deals with constant injuries, and a common word that's used in when you talk about sports and sports injuries is the word injury prone, and a lot of Niners fans like to use that with George Kittle a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, and Jimmy Garoppolo. And I mean, and a lot of people like to use this word for the whole team. This whole team is an injury-prone team. They have constant injuries, and they have had a plethora of injuries the last couple of seasons. There's been years where 15 starters have been on IR and 15 starters have been injured, and we're depleted and we're relying on third and fourth strings. But I want to get your thoughts on this injury-prone term. Do you think there is such a thing as a player being an injury-prone player, or do you think certain athletes deal with injuries at a higher rate than others?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for someone to get to the NFL level, I think inherently the people who are injury prone just wouldn't get to that level. So I think that's number one. I think the things that we know that can lead people to have injuries in the NFL, number one is a prior history of some degree of injury. So if you look at a lot of in the Trent Baalke era, he's drafting people who had ACL injuries. So if you look at the most likely predictor of how someone's going to be injured in the NFL, it's at the NFL combine or at the draft if they've had some sort of injury in college. So that's number one. So prior injuries kind of increase your chance of being more likely to get an injury in NFL. I think number two, it's usage. And I use the Christian McCaffrey example. Like everyone said, McCaffrey's injury prone, right? But if you look at how much Carolina used him, clearly if you're being used, touching the ball 40, 50 times a game, you're more likely to get those injuries because you're just wearing down. So I think usage is number two, which makes people injury prone. And then number three, I think it is potentially a little bit, and I think Peter King said it yesterday on the radio. I forgot what station he was on. It's a style of offense that you play. Like the 49ers play a very physical style of offense. So that's going to place players at risk. Now, I'm not going to say that because Trey Lance ran down the middle. I mean, I think that's bad luck. Deebo was running the ball, injured himself. Garoppolo was trying to evade, trying to extend the play, got hurt. So, I think a lot of it has to do with the style of the offense and the type of player. But most of these injuries are traumatic. Like you can't prevent a lot of these things from happening. Now, a player like Deebo or a player like Kittle who gets these soft tissue injuries, I think a lot of it just has to do with how they're stressing their body and the fact that they're strong, they're powerful, and they're explosive. So I think that's just the line you're always trying to tread. It's like, we want you to be a running back and a wide receiver, but your body's going to, your body's being stressed in a certain way. Or Kittle, we want you to block a lot, but then we want you to catch passes. So I don't think it's something wrong with their bodies. I think it's just the way they're being utilized or the way they're trying to play. So I think very few players at this level are injury prone, but I think there's multiple different factors that can set up an environment in which people are more likely to get injured. And for the 49ers, there are a couple of those that have been there over the past several years.
Yep. Well, that's a great way to look at it. Um, but that basically wraps up the show. That's all the topics that I had for tonight. I appreciate you for joining me. I know you're probably a busy guy, but I appreciate you for joining me and giving me some of your valuable time tonight. That basically wraps up the show. My first ever interview. So you're actually my first ever interview that I've ever done with someone. So appreciate you for joining me.
No, absolutely. Thanks. Anytime. Me, love to be on your show anytime. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, that basically wraps up the show, and we'll see you guys next time.